Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens. Are you in debt? Do you find yourself spending money on things you don't need, but you don't know how to stop? Our guest on this episode, Cait Flanders, found herself in that situation a few years ago and completely turned her life around. Cait's written about what she did in the inspiring Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Year of Less. It documents her life for the first 12 months of a 2-year ban on shopping.
Cait, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Tell us more about the situation you found yourself in financially a few years ago.
Well, I will say up front, I actually was debt-free when I decided to do the shopping ban. But the reason actually that's still interesting to talk about is because a couple of years before that, I had been maxed out with close to $30,000 of consumer debt. And basically, looking back now, it's like always in hindsight, right? The way that I approached my debt repayment was just like way too aggressive. I think part of it is because I was maxed out. So that sort of is your kind of financial rock bottom, like that, and you have no choice at that moment except to start paying it off or to start taking things more seriously. But I was so hard on myself. I was so aggressive with my numbers. I didn't give myself kind of any kind of fun money. I kind of liken it now to if you did like a really intense diet, but then you kind of crash and burn at the end. Like basically I paid off my debt in 2 years, but then I went right back to spending all of my money. So I wasn't going back into debt, but I wasn't saving anything. And, after having come off of this 2 years of paying off a large amount of debt, it's like I knew I could do better, but I wasn't. And instead was just kind of constantly saying yes to things and buying things here and there. And for no real good reason per se, other than that, I don't know, like it just felt good and I just wanted to live that kind of life. But realistically, it wasn't one that I could afford.
Did you consider yourself to be a shopaholic?
No. And it's funny, like I do sometimes wish I had called it something different because it really wasn't that. Like, it's not like I was shopping every day or even every week, but I would say more of like a binge shopper. So like, it's like I wouldn't buy anything for a while, but then all of a sudden you just, I don't know, like impulsively buy 3 or 4 things. And so, no, the other part of that too, that not that I hate the term, but I hate sort of the idea or the image that we get of what a shopaholic looks like. And I think that it really doesn't take an addiction or, a really impulsive behavior. Like you don't have to hit your rock bottom in order to create change. Like I wasn't, going back into debt for my spending. I just wasn't really doing anything good with my money, and it didn't feel good.
So where are you now in this whole journey? You did the 2-year ban on shopping. Where are you now?
In a lot of ways, I think I just live pretty much the same way that I was during the shopping ban. Basically, too, with the ban, it wasn't like I was buying nothing. It was learning how to press pause before making a purchase and only buy something if I actually needed it, rather than like one of my bad habits I would say is I used to buy things thinking like I'm going to use this soon or I'm going to use this one day. But then like one day never really happened. Even like I got to the point where the stack of books was easily like a year's worth of books for me to get through, because you're like, oh, I'm going to read that soon. Oh, I'm going to read that one soon. But then just that wouldn't happen. And then you just have too much stuff. So now I just learn, like I buy things when I need them, when I'm actually going to use them. So yeah, honestly, all things are pretty much par for the course here.
And you say that the less you consumed, the more fulfilled you got. What fulfillment did you get? And what did you find that you enjoyed more than shopping or that little tiny bit of, I don't know, good energy that you felt?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's like 2 ways to answer that. Like, first of all, I would say that like a question I get asked a lot is, so if you couldn't, quickly buy something that would make you feel better, or I'm pretty open in the book about how I started drinking when I was quite young and quit that when I was 27. And so it's like, okay, if you couldn't drink or you couldn't buy anything, like what do you do when you're having a hard day or even you want to celebrate, but mostly the hard stuff, like how do you deal with the hard stuff? And I have the non-sexy answer, which is that you have to feel the hard feelings. Because I think something I didn't realize was that I was sort of just constantly numbing myself, but that wasn't solving any problems for me, at least in a long-term sense. But what fulfilled me, my gosh, I mean, I think that year and just ever since, I've put so much attention and energy into my friendships and relationships, and just know that life is really short, and the people that we choose to spend our time with really matters. Because at the end of the day, you know, who you spend this life with and who you love and support and loves and supports you right back is everything. So, you know, I spent a lot of time with friends and family that year. I also traveled a lot more than I ever had before. You know, my whole 20s, I wanted to travel, but I could never seem to afford to. And the real reason is because I was just prioritizing spending my money on everything else and going into debt for it, or just basically putting all my money towards other things. And so once I finally stopped wasting money on things I didn't actually care about, I could start budgeting for travel, which was great.
I thought it was really interesting when you talk about your breakup with the guy named Andrew and how that super emotional experience made you have that urge to shop. And I'm wondering why it is that the more we spend, or the bigger financial trouble that we're in, the more we get that urge. What do you think about that?
I don't know, other than that it is just an emotional thing. And there's so many financial experts. I do not consider myself one of them, but there's so many financial experts who, I don't know, they like to believe that like money is just numbers. And I'm like, that's a really easy way to look at things. But the reality is that money is really emotional. We have a lot of emotion around our money. If you feel like you're not doing a good job at managing your money, there's a lot of shame and guilt around it, right? So same thing, if we're dealing with tougher times, it just doesn't surprise me that we end up making kind of the wrong financial decision, because it is an emotional thing. And I don't know, there's no easy cure for it except to start paying attention and becoming aware of like what maybe your emotional triggers are.
Nobody Told Me is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 20,000 classes in business, design, and technology.
You can take classes in social media marketing, data science, mobile photography, creative writing, you name it, they've got it.
So whether you're trying to deepen your professional skill set, start a side hustle, or just explore a new passion, Skillshare is there to keep you learning and thriving.
Skillshare offers classes in subjects that are fun and profitable. Some of the classes I'd love to take: social media advertising, building your own brand, and building an Etsy shop that sells.
Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today with a special offer just for our listeners. Get 2 months of Skillshare for just 99 cents.
That's right. Skillshare is offering Nobody Told Me listeners 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for just 99 cents.
To sign up, go to Skillshare.com/NTM. Again, go to Skillshare.com/NTM to start your 2 months now.
That's Skillshare.com/NTM. In the midst of this, you'd started a blog called Blonde on a Budget, and I'm wondering whether writing the blog helped keep you away from shopping by making you more accountable publicly.
Oh, hugely. I started my blog when I was maxed out, and I've always said this. I remember finishing paying off my debt, and I felt like yes, I paid off the debt, but I don't know that I could have done it if I didn't have that feeling of needing to stay accountable, because I used to share all my numbers, including during the shopping ban. I shared all my numbers. So like what percentage I was spending on living expenses and how much I was saving. And there were so many times, both while paying off my debt and during the shopping ban, where I would think about things like I would have that moment of, oh, I could just buy the thing, or, oh, I could spend money on this. But then I would always go, but then I would have to tell people, and that would be awful. It did. It just gave me that feeling of like, I need to stick to this goal. And yeah, no, it worked.
What was the toughest thing for you to give up?
Oh my gosh. So I actually love and hate answering this, because when I say it, I'm not kidding that some journalists have laughed at me. The two hardest things for me personally to give up was books and takeout coffee. And I think they laugh because maybe they seem so frivolous or something. But what I really learned that year was that, number one, that answer would be different for anyone who did something like this. So the reason those were my two things is because they were the two things I bought the most often. And so that meant that for coffee specifically, like almost every single day, I would have little triggers that would normally make me walk into a coffee shop. And so almost every single day, I would have to face those triggers and then change my reaction to them. And same with the books. Like I used to buy books probably at least once a week. And so that means like once a week, I would think about buying books and then I would have to not do that and kind of talk myself out of it.
And how did you do that? How did you break these habits that had gotten you into spending, these triggers?
I think two things really, well, maybe in some ways it's the same thing. I think the biggest thing that helped me overall was having an awareness. So for takeout coffee, it was, I knew how much I was spending on it on average each month before the shopping ban, because I've, tracked my numbers for a long time. So I knew every single month what I was spending on takeout coffee. And I knew I was at a place where I was no longer comfortable with spending that amount of money. And then same with books. Now the books, so the same idea is like I sort of tracked something which created awareness. But during that year, I ended up decluttering and getting rid of a ton of my belongings. But I also sort of took this little inventory of what I was keeping. And I knew that I owned over 50 books that I hadn't even read yet. And every time I would think about buying them, I would just remember that number. I have enough. And I literally have a year's supply of books right now. Like I do not need more books.
And for people who might be listening to this and thinking that maybe they need to create a budget for themselves, does it get easier after the first month?
Yes. And I would actually say like my budgeting advice is always don't start by trying to write a budget, because if you've never written one before, you don't know your numbers. And so you're going to come up with these kind of imaginary numbers that at the end of the month, you're probably not going to meet the targets on any of them, which will then it'll just make you feel awful and it'll make you give up. And that's not the point. For me, the way that I approached budgeting was I didn't actually write a budget for like 3 or 4 months. Instead, I just tracked my spending. So like when I first got started, all I was doing was every single day writing how much I spent and on what. And then at the end of the month, I would add up the different categories I had and figure out how much I was spending on groceries, on restaurants, on gas, on whatever. And then after 3 months, I took all those totals and just figured out the average amount that I was spending. And that's how I created my first budget. I took the average of numbers I was actually spending. Now, the other reason it helps is because I found that tracking, especially by hand, the apps, it sounds really great. They'll, do all the numbers for you and stuff. But I have always found that if I track something by hand, the more I write down, I keep spending money at Starbucks or whatever. The more I write that stuff down, I naturally you start to see where the numbers are going, and I would naturally start spending less because I didn't want to be spending that much money on something. It's just because I was always swiping for it, I was so unaware of what the numbers actually were. So I always just say start with tracking.
What was the reaction from your friends and family when you announced that you were doing this ban on shopping?
Yeah, so family was great. Family was, I think they were pretty used to me doing little things like this. And even most of my friends actually, they had watched me pay off my debt, stop drinking, and I'd also started eating better and running more often and had built up some really good routines and habits for myself. So I don't think that anyone was super surprised. I would say the surprises were more on my end. So things that I was super naive about. I just, first of all, genuinely didn't think anyone would care that I wasn't shopping anymore. I was like, well, this only affects me. Mm-hmm. Why would anyone care? A few people did kind of care. But what was weirder actually was I realized how often we talk about shopping in regular life. So whether we're telling people where I got this new outfit, or, did you see this store's having a huge sale, or this one's going out of business, or don't forget about the whatever deals are coming next week, or anything. Like I didn't realize how often that stuff comes up in conversation until I had nothing to add to the conversation.
Wow.
Like I didn't have any stories. I'm like, that's great. Good for you guys. I don't know.
But you know what? I would think with friends too, that it would be difficult to be trying to keep a budget or trying to keep things in check and not going out to dinner with these friends quite as often or not ordering 2 courses?
Yeah, again, I think that stuff is all really dependent on like where you live and what the lifestyle is. So where I was living, that wasn't huge. I had friends who I maybe went for breakfast with once a week, and I didn't have a ton of that anyways. So I think it all depends on like where you live and what your values are.
Did you feel poor at any point? I mean, by when you looked around at friends who were shopping and buying new clothes or books or electronics or furniture or even the takeout coffee, did you yourself ever feel poor or bad about yourself because you weren't buying these things?
No. And it's funny, I wouldn't say that I ever had, not judged, because judged isn't the right word. If anything, became more conscious of just how many people, like I would hear in their conversations that they would buy something and then they would share sort of the reason for buying it. And you could just hear that we're constantly justifying things and we're still buying it for the wrong reason.
Right.
We're not buying things because it's going to actually be used and add value to our lives. We're buying them because we think they're going to help us become these more aspirational versions of ourselves or something. And it's going to fix this problem that's really not a problem. And so instead, I just noticed I was hearing more and more stuff and just thinking, like, oh, there has to be other ways to this. But we keep thinking that the answer is in products, and that's ingrained in us just because that's what advertising has done, right? Like it's just ingrained in us that we do need these things, and products are created to solve all of our problems. But I just don't think we have quite as many problems as marketers would like us to think that we have.
Mm-hmm. And it's not always shopping that can be toxic, because the first thing that comes to my mind is social media and people spending too much time on their cell phones. How do you think that's similar to over shopping?
I think it's massive, especially how algorithms work, how targeted ads are. I mean, ads are sort of constantly changing and getting smarter, right? Like I think that remarketing has existed for a long time. So there's a lot of stuff that, if you searched it once, you'll see it everywhere. That's existed for years now. But whether or not we like to believe it, I do kind of believe that Instagram listens to us. And like if you give it access to your microphone, you can start talking about a specific product, and people typically will see ads for that product within 24 to 48 hours. And it's really interesting. And then not even just ads in companies, but social media influencers. So being on Instagram, which is still my favorite app right now, but being on Instagram, if you follow a lot of influencers, not only do we not pay enough attention to how we're being influenced by the products that they are claiming are so great, but I don't think influencers even understand the other side of it, which is how much they are influencing people. I think it's just sort of this, this is the easy way for me to make money. But we're all just continuing this cycle and making it even deeper. I don't know. I could talk about that one forever.
Well, what message do you have for people who find themselves bored and ordering stuff online and responding to all of these ads that I mean, there are different retailers that I get ads from several times a day, in my email that, it's 40% off only now until midnight. And then tomorrow morning I wake up and it's 50% off. And, what do you do to fight that urge?
I mean, a huge one that helped me right at the beginning of the ban, and I've just stuck with it ever since, is that I unsubscribed from any newsletter that was coming from a retailer. I also unfollowed all retailers on social media, because at the end of the day, the two things, whether it's ads we're seeing on social or it's emails that are showing up in our inbox, the only things we're seeing are either brand new products or things that are on sale. And number one, like if you're finding that you have enough and you don't actually need to be buying more, then you don't need to be seeing this stuff. But the other part of it is, and like honestly, if I had rebranded the shopping ban, I would just call it a browsing ban. Because the problem in general with all of this stuff is the more stuff we're seeing, it's just like we're constantly looking for more and not appreciating what we already have.
What do you say to people who tell you that they could never do what you did because they're living absolutely paycheck to paycheck and they have no place to cut?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, again, I think that is a very real thing. And so I would never go out, like even with shopping bans in general, I don't go around and be like, yeah, everyone should do them. I do know that it sort of, in some ways, can only meet or solve the problem for some demographics. I do think that if people don't feel good about their finances, like if living paycheck to paycheck and they're truly like they know all of their numbers and there's truly nothing that can be cut back. Personal finance, there's really only two rules. You can either earn more money or you can spend less. That's kind of the two most basic fundamentals of how money works. So yeah, I would say I don't offer it as like a solution that everyone does. Even when people say like, oh, I'd like to do a shopping ban, and they're like nervous about something, I always go back to that thought of you don't have to start with a shopping ban. The same way I say don't start with budgeting. Always start with tracking. So same like if you ever feel like you're buying too much stuff, to start tracking what you're buying. I would also say start keeping track of how much of the stuff you buy you're actually using. The thing I ended up doing, because I ended up doing the shopping ban for a second year, and what I did in the second year, and it sounds really ridiculous, but I kept track of every single thing that I bought and used. So by the end of the year, I knew things like how many tubes of toothpaste I go through in a year.
Wow.
Or how many sticks of deodorant. And I know that sounds so silly, but what it did for me was kind of gave me these data points. So I now no longer ever feel like I need to buy things because I know how long it takes me to get through what I already have. Yeah, it just created data.
And Cait, I'm a millennial, and I'm curious to know if you share my perspective with this. I feel like when I was in school, there was nothing taught about how to really live off of a budget and how to have adult finances. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's a very real problem. And what's been interesting, so I actually spent the first 5 years of my career working for the Ministry of Education where I live. And my job was literally to design and do the layout for courses that were taken from kindergarten through to grade 12. And I know exactly, like in BC where I am, I know exactly where personal finance is placed into every single grade. And I know that there is a little tiny bit of budgeting that's taught for here, as an example, in 10th grade, but it's not taken seriously because it's just an elective, which is basically you just have to pass it. And then it's part of like a graduation requirement. It's a real problem. It's such an interesting debate too, because I've had teachers send me studies and say like, it's actually proven that like kids don't understand money until it relates to a situation they're actually in. Mm-hmm. But then my other side to that is, okay, but why do we understand physics or chemistry or biology or right. I don't know, like
right.
or trigonometry? Like, why do we have to learn and understand that? But we aren't taught anything about money. We're not given that opportunity to maybe understand it. But I don't know. I don't really remember having a huge interest in money as a kid. My dad talked to me about it all the time. It would be really interesting to see it be something that's taught in the last year of high school and also is really reinforced in college. And I know not everyone goes to college, but my gosh, like when you go to college and basically there's just lineups of tables filled with credit card applications, we're just starting kids off on the wrong path.
You touched on this, that you did a massive declutter and purge of your possessions. Tell us more about that. And did you sell things, or were you able to raise some money that way?
I started decluttering at the same time that I started the shopping ban. And really that just came from a place of, not only was I seeing that I was wasting money on stuff I didn't really need, but that I had actually moved, like, unfortunately, right before the shopping ban, that the year before, I had moved a total of 5 times for a whole bunch of different reasons. And after moving that many times and basically seeing boxes basically just go out of one closet and into another and never be opened, I knew how much stuff I owned that I really wasn't using. So I just started decluttering. And in the end, throughout the year, I got rid of a total of 70% of my belongings.
Wow.
But I did a whole mix. Like I donated a lot, sold a few things. I only threw out things if it was socks with holes, old underwear, like just things that like you would never donate that. Like,
right.
Some things do have a shelf life. So, but otherwise, no, I found donated and sold everything.
Cait, our show is called Nobody Told Me, and at the end of each show, we ask our guests, what is your Nobody Told Me lesson? So in your case, what did nobody tell you about shopping or about money that you wish they had?
Well, my dad did tell me everything I probably needed to know about money. But about shopping, we should be buying things as we need them. Objects are created because they're meant to be utilized, right? Like that's the goal. Something is created so that it will be used. So I wish I had known to only buy things as I was actually going to use them. Because I always want to say this now, like buying stuff isn't bad and spending money isn't bad, but it does feel a lot more satisfying when you buy something and use it rather than let it sit on the shelf or constantly look at it and like wish you were making the time for it. It feels a lot better to just use it. There's no guilt. There's no shame in that. Like if you buy it and use it, done. Great.
Cait, what was your reaction when the book became a Wall Street Journal bestseller?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. This whole year has been really weird. I will say I never expected it. I really didn't expect it and don't really have answers as to why it's happened. Other than that, I mean, this still remains such a hot topic, whether you want to call it minimalism or simplifying. We still seem to have not found all the answers of what exactly we're looking for. It's been a very interesting year, very unexpected, good, like all around, but just very unexpected.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the book is so relatable to me and to so many of my friends and really just anybody who has found it so easy to shop more because it's so readily available.
Mm-hmm. If I could sum it up, like I said, I would have maybe called it something like a browsing ban. The shopping ban, it basically just felt like for the very first time, I sort of was living with like pause button pressed down. You know, like before making a purchase or just mindlessly kind of spending on anything, it was like for the first time, I like put this pause button between me and my impulsive action. And so I could see, oh, okay, like, so I'm not allowed to do this, or, you know, just start asking myself, do I actually really need this thing? And my go-to reaction had always been just do whatever impulsively. And for the first time that year, I really stopped and take a breath, right? And then just say, okay, do I actually need this thing? Yes or no?
All right, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Cait. We really appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Our thanks to Cait Flanders. Again, her book is called The Year of Less. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You are listening to Nobody Told Me. Thanks so much for joining us.